The views and content expressed on the following program are provided solely for informational and entertainment purposes. They do not constitute legal advice. A podcast is not a substitute for retaining a competent, licensed attorney to advise you on your specific legal situation.
Break the business, play is work and work is play. Power into creators, have fun along the way. Break the business, doing what it takes. Celebrate success and learn from the mistakes.
How's it going, everybody? Welcome to the show. It is time for Break the Business, where we empower indie creators and have some fun along the way. I'm Ryan Kairalla, and it is a pleasure to have you here this week. A fine program we have for you, viewers and listeners, this week. Amazing guests. We're going to be joined in the second segment by award-winning producer and songwriter and industry executive Charlie Peacock. In addition to being just an amazing creator of music, he's also brought about some of my favorite acts in music. He helped bring Switchfoot into the world, love Switchfoot, the Civil Wars, so many great bands that owe their careers to this guy. He's going to have a lot of great insight to share. I'm excited to talk to him in the second segment. Speaking of people I'm excited to talk to, I know we are all thrilled for the co-host that is joining us this week, musician, investor, frontman for Gideon King and City Blog. Gideon King is here. Hello, Gideon.
Howdy. How you been?
I'm doing very, very well. And not just because of the fact that whenever I see that face and those magnificent sunglasses on my co-host, it immediately makes me smile. Let me tell you something that's also kind of making me smile, Gideon King, in sort of a you have to laugh to keep yourself from crying kind of way. I've made no secret of the fact that I am a fan of a baseball team called the Miami Marlins, which throughout their history has given us a few moments of happiness, a couple world championships. But for the most part, being a Marlins fan is an exercise in just crushing disappointment, tragedy after tragedy after tragedy. Right. And the most recent example of the tragedy you face as a Marlins fan is being on the receiving end of what happened today, which is being the team that brought Shohei Ohtani into the 50-50 club. Tonight, the Miami Marlins gave up the home run that has given Shohei Ohtani, probably the greatest baseball player who's ever lived, his 50th home run, to make him the only player in baseball history ever to get 50 home runs and 50 stolen bases. But that alone isn't what makes this embarrassing. Of course, it has to be the Marlins that did this. What's embarrassing is the game that the Marlins allowed Shohei Ohtani to produce en route to his 50-50 season. This stat line that I'm about to read to you, Gideon, I don't know if you saw the stat line that he achieved in tonight's game.
I did.
To call these video game numbers would require a gift for understatement. Like, I could not produce these numbers in a video game. If I fired up my copy of MLB The Show, which of course is collecting dust because I'm a dad of a toddler, and so video games aren't a part of my life anymore, but if I managed to blow the dust off it and somehow was able to get my Xbox up and running and opened up MLB The Show and just created a player and maxed out his stats and moved all the hitting sliders as far as they would go, I could not play a game in which I could have a player go 6 for 6 with 3 home runs, 10 RBIs, 17 total bases, and a couple stolen bases in there for good measure. That is insane that the Marlins let Shohei Ohtani do that to them while he also became a member of the 50-50 club.
First of all, I don't know that I've ever heard of the Miami Marlins. Is that a professional baseball team? Because I'm a Yankee fan, and I've been a baseball fan my whole life. So are you sure that that's actually a professional baseball team? Are you absolutely positive?
Well, if you're a Yankees fan, you might be familiar with the Marlins as being the AAA franchise that supplies your legitimate baseball team with some of your best players that wind up having long, magnificent careers.
No, here's the thing. He is, not only is he a freak near Babe Ruth like baseball player talent, but he's like also a good guy, which is like really annoying.
Pick one.
He's amazing. Although I have to say, not that this is a baseball show, and I don't want to send us down the garden path, but we have this guy on the Yankees called Aaron Judge, and he's about 6'7", 280 pounds or whatever he is, and he actually, in my extremely humble estimation, is actually better than Ohtani. He's a far better hitter. And I actually think if I had to start a franchise because of attitude, just sort of attitude and his freakish hitting skills, which he is out hitting Ohtani this year, I would probably start a franchise with Aaron Judge before I would start a franchise with Ohtani. Now, I don't know if that makes you feel any better, because my goal in life in general is to make you feel better, but I don't know if that does. But I do vaguely recall a professional baseball team called the Miami Marlins. Vaguely.
Yeah, you might know him as the team that beat the Yankees in the World Series in 2003.
I vaguely remember that, but I have what's known as selective amnesia.
So your attempt to try to soothe the pain I am feeling right now about how bad the Marlins are is to say Ohtani's not even that good, Ryan. You know who's good is my guy Aaron Judge. That was your move to make me feel better.
That's basically what I'm doing. Yes. Yeah. Yes.
Well, thank you. That, I feel terrific
therapy.
now. I'm doing cartwheels over
therapy.
here.
That's therapy. That's what I call therapy.
God. This is good. I mean, aside from just how flabbergasted I am by this stat line, which I thought was a misprint when I read it.
I mean, he's unbelievable.
I remain still quite excited for the show to come today. I think it's going to be cool to chat with Charlie Peacock, and I'm excited for the stories that we have, Gideon. I want to start with a story that we actually covered a couple weeks ago on this show, but I sort of kept it in my front pocket here for when Gideon King was going to come in 2 weeks, because I wanted to get your insight on it. Plus, Billboard Magazine did a follow-up on this story that I think made this worth talking about. So want to catch the viewers and listeners up for those who missed the show a couple weeks ago. There was back on September 4th, the Justice Department announced that it was indicting an individual named Michael Smith in connection with this really elaborate enterprise to defraud streaming services. Basically, what Michael Smith did is commit streaming fraud, which is not rare. We see a lot of examples of this where people create bot accounts or that will stream one particular song and to try to hike up the royalties on that song. And that's pretty common. And oftentimes streaming services are pretty good at catching those, because if they see just some random song getting a suspiciously high number of streams, they know that the streams are fake and they'll shut that song down and not pay out any royalties.
Right.
But what Michael Smith did that was kind of clever and ultimately is going to get him indicted and in big trouble with the feds, is Smith allegedly not only created a series of bots to download songs, or sorry, not download, but stream songs and goose up the royalties, but also separately created a series of AI-generated songs with the help of some co-conspirators and flooded the streaming services with those songs so that when his other set of bots was streaming the songs, none of those songs would get a significantly high number of streams such that the streaming services would get tipped off, but would stream just high enough to accumulate some royalties. And this, alleged criminal enterprise defrauded the streaming services to the tune of about $10 million, which is a pretty significant dollar amount in what we see in these cases. And so it was pretty mind-boggling. It's the first time that we've seen the Justice Department the feds get involved in streaming fraud. This is normally something that's just handled between the streaming services and the users. And the update we have on this is that Billboard came out with an article in which they talked to a bunch of streaming company executives and asked them what I think is a pretty important question. In light of this example of streaming fraud kind of getting to the next level such that it's now become a federal crime, it's become fraud, are you considering any changes to your model streaming services? Are there things that you might want to start doing, perhaps reforms that have been talked about before, reforms that have been talked about on this show before, that you might want to start to implement? But before we get into what some of those reforms might be, Gideon, wanted to get your perspective on this case in general. I know you're You have an investment presence in some streaming services. This is an industry you follow very closely. And even though you're not a lawyer, you've probably forgotten more about litigation than I've ever known. And so, when you read about the story, when you heard about this indictment, you must have had a lot of thoughts.
So I did have a lot of thoughts. The thing about indictments is they're super political. And what I mean by that is this guy who did this is a sleazeball. Okay? He's the bottom of the pond. He's gotten nailed. He's fake as an artist. He's fake as a streaming entity. He's a royal piece of what you can't say on this show, or at least I'm not supposed to say on this show. So I guess what I would say to your viewers or anyone listening is, yeah, we got ourselves a bad actor. But just as in Wall Street, when they nailed Bernie Madoff, it was this huge splashy story. And you know what's funny, Ryan? These huge splashy stories almost obfuscate or eclipse the thousands of tiny murders that take place in these businesses. Meaning, yeah, this guy's just a bad guy. He's obvious. It will get some press. Bernie Madoff got press. But what didn't get press on Wall Street is millions of tiny little unethical frauds. And I think the same thing is taking place in the streaming business. When music is released, streams are acquired in legal ways that may not be totally legal, ways that are quasi gray area. And so there's a million gradations, if you will, of fraud or unethical stream acquiring in the streaming world. And it's funny because these big flashy stories are of course worth covering. We all marvel at these psychos who do these horrible things. And then we have the big bad Justice Department and FBI come in and make sure that justice is served. But actually, the real problem with the ethical superstructure of the streaming business is so many streams are fake. Now, what does the word fake mean? If Ryan Kairalla is a huge artist, okay, and he releases a song, you better damn well understand that you're going to get more attention from editorial playlists on Spotify's and get more stream than poor old Gideon, who's not a Taylor Swift name, okay? So is that illegal? Probably not. Is it an unfortunate favoritism? It sure as hell is. If Joe Blow releases his next song, he may pay someone who buys playlists to get his new song on those playlists. And while that may not be illegal and probably isn't, there's a certain fakery embedded in that process. And so there's a million gradations. And unfortunately, streams are the barometer. They're the benchmark, right? I release songs and I sit there and I'm absolutely terrified as to how little or how many streams I'm going to get. So the tension and the radioactivity around the acquisition of streams or getting streams leads to so much ambition, which leads to such a kind of ambition, which leads to fraud. Now, let me tell you something. $10 million is a drop in the bucket. Okay? It's a drop in the bucket. So this ain't going to change anything. There'll be some press, there'll be press releases, and there'll be talk of integrity in the streaming process. But it ain't going to change a thing. Further, the declarations in some of these articles that you and I shared with each other prior to the show say, well, is the streaming model broken? And no way in hell is the streaming model broken. It is projected, Ryan, and people who are listening, it is projected to grow at a CAGR, a compounded annual growth rate of 28% through 2032. Streaming is growing. Streaming is the bat and the ball, and streaming dominates the distribution of music. So this is unfortunate, but I think if our regulators and our stewards of ethics, if you want to say, in the streaming world, were really interested in doing the right thing and not making these big splashy indictments, which they should, what the real conversation would be is how many streams out there are fake. I mean, I got to tell you, kills me when I release a good song. And I've released a lot of songs. Some are not so good, but I've released a few good ones. And it kills me when I see a huge artist release a crappy song. You know, they just pumped it out and collaborated with, and they get on playlists ASAP. And why? Why? It's like the old days, Ryan, when the record labels would just buy their way onto radio spins for their artists.
Payola.
And so here we are again. The more things change, the more they stay the same. So while I'm, of course, glad that this sleazeball got nailed, and perhaps it will create some artificial and cosmetic change in the industry, it won't do much. Streaming is alive and well, and it's growing like hell. And favoritism and subtle, tiny murders to the ethical superstructure of streaming take place and exist. Now, what people have said recently, and let me know if I'm going on too long. I'll try and shut it down in a few seconds.
That's good stuff.
That's the risk of having me on your show. You ask me a question, I just go on like a presidential candidate. But here's the thing. One of the things that all these articles are saying is that the apps themselves are confusing. You know, you try to look up John Coltrane, you try to look up Paul McCartney, you try to look up Bono or U2, and all this stuff comes on. Yeah, okay. The apps could be better, but they don't. The really big apps like a Spotify or Deezer, they do not help you discover new artists. The algorithms are not successful in doing that. And that is where I think the streaming world is really falling down. While they will tell you that streaming is the ultimate democratization of music because Ryan Kairalla can release his tune tomorrow morning, the truth is that as discovery mechanisms, they stink. I own AudioMac, or I'm one of the biggest shareholders of AudioMac, and the entire premise of it is to discover new artists. And I think it's actually fairly successful in doing that, but we don't own the world the way Spotify does. So, listen, I said a whole lot of a lot, and you probably want to kick me off the show after speaking for that long.
Not even a little bit, because I want to talk to you now about the path forward here. Because as you aptly noted, right, when you just sue one bad actor, you're treating a symptom. But you're not actually fixing anything. Like, you know, if you throw the book at this particular person, it's not going to fix the problem. The only way you're going to fix the problem is to make systemic changes in the way streaming services operate. And this Billboard article does talk about some proposals that could have a measurable effect on streaming fraud, including one proposal that I actually brought up on this show 2 weeks ago. And so I feel like Billboard might be like stealing some of my ideas here, which is to have streaming services shift from a pro rata royalty payment system to a user-centric royalty payment system. So right now what streaming services like Spotify do is all the revenue goes into one big pot, and then however much one person's music gets streamed relative to all the streams, that's how much money that particular artist gets. So if Gideon King's music is streamed 10% of the time on Spotify, then Gideon King gets 10% of the money less whatever Spotify's cut is. And that model makes a platform ripe for fraud because it creates a perverse incentive for people to create a bunch of bots that just do nothing but relentlessly download all day. And then suddenly Ryan Kairalla, who paid $9.99 for his Spotify account, very little of Ryan Kailla's $9.99 is actually going to the artist that Ryan Kairalla listened to. And instead, my $9.99 is subsidizing some bot and paying royalties to some like artist I don't care about. And so what should be done, what I've proposed for as long as I've had a voice in radio, is to switch to a user-centric system where we treat every single user on the platform as their own royalty pot. So Ryan Kairalla pays $9.99, and if Ryan Kairalla does nothing but stream Gideon King's music for a whole month, then Gideon King gets my whole $9.99. I don't have to, my money doesn't go to pay somebody else's royalty. You switch to a user-centric account or a user-centric system, now you can't have bots anymore because every user is now going to be treated equally no matter how much they download. The other thing you need to do if you're really serious about getting rid of streaming fraud, no more free accounts. Everybody has to pay to use Spotify. Not only does that put more money into the system, which is good, but why should somebody who's not actually putting money into Spotify be able to relentlessly download or relentlessly stream music and get royalties paid out to other artists. Free accounts mean that you can have more bot accounts. If everybody has to pay $9.99 a month to get into to buy into to have a Spotify subscription, you're not, bots are gone overnight. And so those seem like two pretty simple solutions that could go a long way to fixing streaming fraud, but I don't think that the major streaming services want to do it because, as you noted, the current system, even though it's ripe with fraud, helps the big artists, right? Pro rata royalties help the major label artists. The major label artists want the users that just do nothing but stream Ed Sheeran all day. And so,
I mean, dude,
that the incentives are misaligned.
I love you and I love your show and all your ideas are just and there's an economic kind of sense to what you're saying, but there's a greater chance that, I win, that I start as center for the LA Lakers then next year than any of this stuff happens. Never going to happen.
Let me ask you, not to put you on this.
In doing that, you're meddling with the primal forces, man. And don't forget also, first of all, just because you have to pay for a subscription doesn't mean the bots won't pay for it. It's like the dark web where people do pay up for people's social security numbers so they can go steal from them and defraud them. So there will be, in effect, a black market, and people will pay for subscriptions, and that may not stop the bot technology from prospering. I love your idea.
But if you combine it with user-centric royalties, then the most the bot can give you is their $9.99. They don't get to use. They don't get to give their $9.99 and my $9.99.
But this just ain't gonna happen. This is what the model that exists, where the record labels have a lot of sway over Spotify in a number of ways, is concretized. It will be hard to break it. The other crazy thing about all this is Spotify doesn't even make any money. That's the crazy thing about all this. Spotify's not even making any money. So, in one respect, that would lend some hope to your theories that these things could get done, because you at least might have one unhappy entity in the value chain. Something's got to give, but all that's going to give is Spotify's going to end up getting a few more bucks from the labels, or they'll get some kind of a deal. But it's just not going to happen. There's too many forces acting against that model.
I didn't know this. Spotify's not making any money. Like, it's not a profitable platform. Like, what's the long-term play? If I'm a Spotify investor, like, why am I putting money into this platform? Like what is its eventual goal in terms of becoming profitable then?
So size. Eventually,
it's not big enough.
You know what it's like? It's like the grocery store business, which has 2%. A grocery business which has 2% margins, right? Mm-hmm. Eventually, if you get big enough and you have enough Grand Unions out there, I'm dating myself a little, but enough Whole Foods, enough Winn-Dixies, with enough scale and size, you can make a little money. But if the primary measures of whether you make money in a company are earnings per share and free cash flow per share. And Spotify has de minimis levels of earnings per share and very little free cash flow per share. Now, the promise of it scaling so big that it's horrific fixed cost structure, really it's horrific deals of paying out so much to the labels, the prospects of it outgrowing that and ultimately making money are what caused people in the stock market to give it such a big market cap. But right now, Spotify is not a particularly profitable company. They just barely make a couple bucks.
Wow.
It's a very, the whole model is hard. The only thing is that it was always bad in a lot of ways. Again, the radio, the labels were paying off radio. Sync was always a racket. And so, look, it's a brutal situation, and there are tons of tiny murders and tiny unethical sort of mechanisms within the streaming world. But they ain't going to change. This will make a big splash. Someone will have a good career move at the Justice Department, and then nothing's going to change. God, I feel like Dr. Doom, but that's why I wear the sunglasses. Man, I want to complete the image of Dr. Doom.
Let's move on to happier topics. Then we'll go from the depressing state of music streaming to the depressing state of music touring.
Right.
So I was inclined to bring this story up because you told me that you're looking at taking your band, Gideon King's City Blog, on
Yeah,
tour.
we're negotiating some stuff now. We might go on tour, yeah.
Very exciting. Love that for you. But I am hopeful that you're going to be able to stay in the black on this particular tour because, from a recent article in Hypebot is talking about how we are still continuing to see indie bands canceling tours, continuing this continuing trend of post-COVID tours, indie artists not being able to make the numbers work. From the article, quote, while Live Nation reports rising sales and profits and Taylor Swift breaks records, much of the independent live music industry is struggling. There are multiple reasons for the shift. Inflation, rising wages, touring costs, and increased competition are all to blame. The pressures are the same for the independent music venues and smaller festivals that most artists count on.
So,
I know you looked at this article. Is this kind of in line with what you're seeing on the ground as you're planning a tour?
Here I can bring a little bit of sunshine into our show this evening because let's put this in perspective a little bit. After COVID, there was an incredible thirst for live music, and people going on tour did really, really well. In fact, I was talking to my manager and some other managers about it recently. But what has happened is you're breaking the consumer with the inflation a little bit right now. Between the fees that are charged on top of ticket prices, it's getting it's like a Yankee game, okay, or a Knicks game or an LA Lakers game. It's getting really hard to go see a show. It's so expensive. So what's happening is that some shows are getting canceled because not enough tickets are moving because of the expense structure of the whole structure, because of the expensive nature of the whole structure. Keep in mind one thing, Ryan. It's like some of the biggest mistakes I made when I bought businesses when I was younger was buying businesses with big fixed costs, not variable costs. So if Ryan Kairalla and Gideon King go on tour, okay, because you and I are the next Simon and Garfunkel, okay.
I love this already.
And we don't sell. What's that? And we don't.
I love this already. I don't know how you got a hold of my dream journal and are just reading it word for word now, but
if you and I go on tour, okay, our fixed costs are the same. We got a tour bus. We have the same 5 band members. We got to play the saxophone. We got to pay the saxophone player. We got to pay the guitar, tech. Someone's got to drive the bus. And so you have fixed costs. And so what you have is a highly levered business to operating expenses. You have both positive operating expenses to the extent ticket prices go up, and you have negative operating leverage to the extent ticket prices go down. So right now, ticket prices are a little too high. People are starting to buy less and say, you know what, screw this. I'll stay home. If I want to see the Killers live, if I want to see Hozier live, if I want to see Jacob Collier live, if I want to see Peter Frampton at the Beacon the other night in New York live, I'm going to stay home and watch it on YouTube because for me and my girlfriend, it's freaking $450 plus a couple drinks and it's $600. So those ticket prices are starting to back off. And yet the fixed costs for taking Peter Frampton on the road is the same. And so this is what you're actually seeing is not the end of the world. You're just seeing the cyclical ups and downs of a business. I mean, there's an old joke, right, in the oil business called, the best cure for high prices is high prices. And that's what's happening in the music business right now. You're going to see a regulation. You're going to see a moderation, an adjustment where ticket prices need to come down a little bit. And Live Nation, AEG, you're going to have to stop being so goddamn greedy. And fees are going to have to come down a little bit. And it will normalize. But there's no doubt. I mean, look at the Black Keys canceling their tour in May, right? There's no doubt that the expense structure is overburdening these outfits, and you can't quite squeeze the consumer anymore. Just like at the grocery store, they've kind of had it. They've kind of had it with shows and how much money it is. I mean, my wife just said, oh, let's go see Bono. Let's go see Peter Frampton the other night. I'm like, you know what? I don't mean to sound like a cheap bastard, but I really don't want to pay this much money to go to see Peter Frampton or to go see, Casey Musgraves. It's just gotten insane. Let's just stay home and watch YouTubes of those people. So that's what's happening. But the tour business is not dead. It's just going through a cyclical adjustment.
Well,
a little less dark than the other one.
Well, I mean, the tour business isn't dead, but I'm particularly concerned for the effects it's having on the indie artist population.
Terrible.
I had an economics professor who used to say that when there's a global downturn in the economy, the North gets the sniffles and the South gets pneumonia, right?
Totally.
And this is kind of the same thing, right? when there is a shift in the way that economics of touring works, yeah, it hurts the big artists like the Black Keys has to cancel their tour and J-Lo cancels their tour. But, the Black Keys and J-Lo are still paying their mortgage. They're getting the sniffles. The pneumonia are these indie artists that this Hype article talks about who they needed this tour to to pay their rent and to move their careers forward. And like touring used to be for indie creators, that was your principal source of income. That was 80% of your income, and it's disappearing. And so
it's really bad.
I don't like, and so like,
that's bad.
If that cycle doesn't get fixed for indie artists, like that's a huge economics problem for a big segment of our industry.
And that's why, well, there's two things to say really quickly about that. One is the indie artist and the mid-level artist, even if they're not indie, even if they're the mid-level label artist, they don't have pricing power. Okay?
Yeah.
If your 12-year-old daughters are nagging you to see Taylor Swift, eventually you're going to give in, you're going to spend the money, and you're going to go. She has pricing power. Coldplay, pricing power. But Emily King or, let me name 50 different, mid-sized artists out there, they don't have the pricing power. Okay, so the people aren't going to come. It's really, and yet they're still paying the same inflation costs of high gas prices, high everything, high insurance, everything you need to get to go on tour. So it is bad for the indie artists, which is why I know a lot of artists, okay, who are accepting background vocal gigs with big, people who would go on tour normally themselves. Just spoke to a woman today. She's a really well-known singer. And she basically said, no, I'm going back out, meaning I'm going back on tour with a big band. I won't name the band, but they're a big band. They have 4 million followers on Spotify, on Instagram. And I said, why? You were going to go on tour. Like, you're amazing. And she was like, yeah, no, it's not going to happen. I can't charge ticket prices that are enough. It's too expensive. Oh. I'm just going to go on tour and get paid to sing backgrounds, and at least then I can make some money. So, dude, you're so right. Another way to say it is shit flows downhill. And that's what's happening, man. It's sad, and there's not going to be an answer, but that's the case that's one of the unfortunate parts of economics in general, is that the mid guy and the little guy gets hammered more than the big guy.
Boy, we really broke everybody's hearts this week.
I know. I'm sorry, man. I'm sorry, dude. There's got to be something happy to talk about.
No, I'm telling you what's going to make everybody happy is the guest we got coming up in the second segment. I'm really excited to chat with Charlie Peacock. That's going to be really fun. Don't go anywhere, viewers and listeners. We'll be back in 2 minutes here on Break the Business.
Break the Business is presented in cooperation with Ryan A. Kairalla, PA. Ryan A. Kairalla, PA is a law firm providing transactional entertainment legal services, including contracts, business formation, commercial law, copyright, trademark, and more. Ryan A. Kairalla, PA, Miami, Florida. rkpalaw.com.
Streaming services for Break the Business provided by LEK Entertainment. LEK Entertainment is a full-service entertainment company offering everything from consultations to full-scale events and productions, including audio and video productions, voiceovers, staged theatrical productions, script and music development, and streaming services. For more information, visit lekentertainment.com. LEK Entertainment wants to help you bring your story to life.
Thanks for supporting Break the Business. If you have a question or topic that you want us to discuss, email us at breakthebusiness@gmail.com. You can follow the host, that's me, on Twitter at Ryan Kair, and you can follow the show at the BTB Podcast. Be sure to subscribe to the show on Twitch, YouTube, and Facebook, and on all major podcast platforms. And now, let's get back to the show.
My goodness, Shohei Ohtani, 6 for 6, 3 home runs, 10 RBIs, 17 stolen bases. I still can't believe it. I've lost my own son, Gideon, in terms of him ever becoming a Marlins fan. He's 2 years old. I know he has already picked his allegiance to the Dodgers. That's my feeling, too, is good for him. Why should he have to have a lifetime of baseball suffering? He should be able to start fresh with a team like the Dodgers who will not break his heart.
Dude, the Miami's not even that bad. Can you imagine being a Knicks fan? I was only 3 years old when they won the last championship. It's one disappointing year after another. Anyway, let's talk about your guest. But being a Knicks fan is worse than being a Miami Marlins fan. But, at some point you have to bring your guest on the show. So
no argument here, Gideon King. Let's go ahead and bring out our guest this week.
Welcome Charlie to the show, making hits that steal the glow. With your beats you rock the night, shining star you light the sky.
Our guest this week is a Grammy-winning songwriter, producer, and music industry luminary whose new album, Every Kind of Uh-Oh, dropped on August 30th, and his memoir, Roots and Rhythm, A Life in Music, will come out early next year. You can find out more about our guest's work by visiting charliepeacock.com. We are happy to welcome Charlie Peacock on To Break the Business. Hello, Charlie.
Well, hello. Good to see you, fellas. I'm so glad that I've already put in my 50 years in the music industry after listening to you guys for the last 20 minutes.
Sorry, Charlie.
No, I feel good, and I'm just glad, and I'm also feel good that my children who are in the business are doing well, so I'm feeling pretty fortunate right now.
Well, before we get into the questions about you, then, I'd like to benefit from your perspective on this, because it's entirely possible that Gideon and I are pretty short-sighted. We don't have the broad view of the industry that you have from a lifetime in it. Can you give us a sense of perspective about why perhaps we should be more optimistic about the industry of today and the opportunities that it can create for artists?
No, I think the first thing I'd say is that all the points that I heard you fellas mention are all spot on, and I probably would have just echoed them.
So no is your
I
answer.
think, I think what I can bring to it is having come up, in the late 1970s and early 80s. I do know that what I've seen in terms of the democratization is that it hasn't really truly benefited us. I can say from a record producer and songwriter standpoint that we've never had better singers, we've never had better music, better production, all of that. So that sort of egalitarian move there did that. But the problem is that we can't access it. It's not. I remember it was about 20 years ago when I first started following a lot of the new media gurus, and everybody was saying, well, the librarian will be king. Well, as it turns out, the librarian can be just the biggest capitalist in the world as well. So, so I think what I miss is that a little bit of that tension that existed in the system when you had to move from circles of affirmation. So you started with your family and you had your circle of affirmation. You had to convince your parents, or your brothers and sisters that you were serious about music, right? You had to convince the other kids in school. You had to convince band teacher. You had to convince. And so you had your first circle of affirmation and you rose through it, right? And you got through it. And then you got to the point where the older kids would let you play in a band with them. And then there was the next circle of affirmation. And you sort of kept going through those. And never at any point of it, you did not think to yourself, hey, I'll do this as a side gig, right? Like I'll have my gig that pays for all of this, whether it's a barista or a stockbroker, whatever it is. No, you were sort of like, hey, I'm passionate about this. This is going to be my gig. And so you kept traveling through these circles of affirmation that eventually became monetized. And then eventually you were at a place where if you lived in Northern California, or if you lived in Durham, North Carolina, or in New York City or wherever, you began to compete for what was essentially a few small slots of people who would be competitive enough to get the ear of the major entertainment corporations or record companies at the time. And you would maybe get a shot at that. And so you knew who you were competing with because you were out there in the clubs listening to the same bands. You were trading, like, here's the record that we just finished and we're pitching it to Epic Records or whatever it is. And the community was so much smaller. And you kind of knew what you were competing with. Now it's so spread out. It is, I would say, again, um, as you guys know, just even going through the COVID period, I feel like we recovered a certain level of virtuosity, right? Because I'm a person who believes that virtuosity should be in the system. I don't like wankers who are just, showing off, but I think that virtuosity does serve the system to a certain extent. In the same way that you could look at, in my generation, a bass player like Jaco Pastorius. You wouldn't say, well, he played on a ton of hit songs, but you would say, yeah, but a whole bunch of bass players who grew up on Jaco played on a whole bunch of hit songs, right? So virtuosity would have its influence in that way. And so I've seen these really positive developments, through the fact that kids learn on YouTube. I mean, I ran a school of music and developed a commercial music program for a university here in Nashville. And so the weirdest thing in the whole world is when we would have kids who would come into audition, right? And they would play some classical piece, and we'd say, well, did you grow up, playing in orchestra? They'd be like, no, I just learned to play it on YouTube. Right.
Yeah.
And so I do celebrate these tools to a certain extent, but I definitely have a conviction that in some ways we got more unique music, and that there was a certain kind of competition that helped the music when there were 40 metropolitan areas in America and 10 possible bands or artists in each one of those cities that were deserving of a record deal.
I mean,
Well-
you know what? I'll tell you, Ryan, what Charlie's saying resonates with me. I grew up as a jazz guitar player, and a couple of phrases that Charlie said, circles of affirmation, so true. And rising up through the scene is just rites of passage, even playing certain things, rhythm changes, all kinds of things in the jazz world. But in the rock world too, you had to be able to play guitar a little bit. And then Charlie said one other thing that's really interesting, which is we do have an explosion, Ryan, of virtuosity. If you go on Instagram, there are shredders now on guitar like there have never been before.
Never been.
There's 150 Pat Metheny's out there, and 150, John Scott. Well, he's a special thing, but there's a million Van Halens and Steve Vais and a million Peter Framptons and a million John. But here's the weird thing: the people listening to music and consuming it are not demanding that. It's kids up with a laptop. And they put out some music, but no one really goes to concerts and hears a rock, even a solo anymore. Like John Mayer seems old-fashioned now. There's no Van Halens, there's no anything. And so there's a really bizarre dichotomy where you have more I mean, I've been playing guitar jazz guitar since I was 8 years old. There's more shredders and amazing jazz and rock guitar players who are freaks, technically, than there ever have been. Okay, George Benson, okay, and Van Halen seem like slow players compared to these people.
Yeah, exactly.
But nobody, except for in a boutique world, Ryan, nobody's demanding that. When Ed Sheeran or Drake or Taylor Swift or whoever gets on stage, nobody's demanding that really great musicianship the way they wanted it from John Bonham, who's a great drummer with Led Zeppelin, or the drummer for Jimi Hendrix. So this is a really weird thing to me, that there's this greatness around, and yet nobody wants to see it, if you know what I'm saying, Charlie.
Yeah, well, in some ways, they're forced to become these virtuoso influencers in a sense, and use the same sort of pattern as the influencer. And then maybe I've seen a few of them come through Nashville here. But what's really interesting about it is that the metrics are not commensurate. So they may have 1 million streams on a particular video, right? But they can only sell 200 hard tickets in Nashville.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah, it's just such a mixed blessing. I mean, I love the democratization of music. I love that there are artists out there in far-flung areas of the country or the world that I get to know, and whose music I've gotten to experience that I would never ever have gotten to know 20 years ago, 40 years ago in this industry. I love that. It's a welcome development. I love that there are, that it's easier than ever to learn how to play an instrument. It's easier than ever to get really, really good at it and then to share those talents with others. But we're still having a lot of trouble figuring out how to make that profitable and scalable for the masses who are trying to make this a profession for themselves. I mean, this is a longer
Yeah.
conversation, but
Well,
I
you
do.
end up
Sorry.
Yeah, Ryan, you end up being indebted either to this influencer model or to the Universal Music model, or one of the giants.
Whew, pick your
And
poison.
there isn't a what it does is it has created this caste system where we don't even have a middle class anymore. Like you could have like this whole stream of like millions of actually very competent musicians or songwriters or performers, right? But they aren't able to create wealth. In the old system, like let's just take my career for example. Um, when I started out, I didn't come from a family that had money. Uh, my parents didn't create wealth. I started working as soon as I was 15 and a half. I could get a job, and that's when I started working, and I've been working ever since. And at the same time as I was working, as a dishwasher or a department store, that's when I was playing weekends, Friday and Saturday nights. So I started then I was like, oh my gosh, well, I can get paid that much on the weekends. Why would I bother working, the rest of the week? I should just put all my eggs in this music basket. Right. So when after that, I didn't have my first platinum record until I was 35 years old. So it took me from the time that I started my first trumpet lesson in fourth grade to I was 35 years. It took like something like what, almost 27 years or whether overnight sensation, right? But once that happened, right, then it was like, okay, you've delivered on the promise, right? We've already the companies, right, which was a lot of people at that point. We'd already, they'd invested hundreds of thousands of dollars in me, whether as an artist or giving me productions to work on, whatever it might be, publishing advances, all of that. So I finally deliver on that. And then I began to multiply that. Now it's like, okay, let's do that again and again and again and again, right? Well, once I had done that, then I moved into a different stratosphere where I could be one of the people where it's like, no, I make my own record. I'll fund my own record, right? Or you know what? I love that artist over there and nobody's signing them and they just don't see it or hear it. But I see it and hear it and I'll fund it and I'll take it to Columbia and do a deal with them, right? So if you can't create that kind of wealth buffer, you couldn't, like as a producer, artist, for me, I love artist development. I love discovering talent. I just love encouraging young people. But without my own ability to do that, I'm always going to be begging Universal to take me seriously, right? There's always going to be someone I'm going to be begging to take me seriously. And so I kind of miss that old model again, too, where I, as an artist, could create wealth in order to pass that on and multiply it. There wouldn't, for me, like there wouldn't be a Switchfoot who's been, out there active as a great band for 25 years if I hadn't been able to create enough wealth to sign that band. And I didn't have a lot of money, but I had more money than Switchfoot did.
Well,
Right.
what are you most proud of when you look back on your career? Is it the stuff that you've done on your own, where the music you've made for your own albums, the music you've written for film, or is it the stuff you produced, or is it the artists that you've developed and discovered? Is it like do you
Feel
see
great about the artist discovery part. I mean, that's incredibly rewarding because even at this point, I can still go to the Ryman Auditorium next week, right? And there's a band that I produced or discovered, right? And my wife and I are going to get a nice, cozy parking spot up front, right? And we're going to go in and we're going to be fans. and we're going to listen, and we're going to go, it's going to produce gratitude in us. We're going to be thankful that we got to be a part of their story, and we'll remember them as young people. We'll remember dinners around our table. We will remember how excited they were when they rented their first car, like that was the most amazing thing in the whole world. But we got to witness that innocence of people developing and seeing their dreams come true. And so, yeah, so whether it goes all the way back to Switchfoot, or, in the last decade with the Civil Wars or other bands, the Lone Bellow and others, yeah, it's, to me, that's incredibly rewarding. But I would have to say this, selfishly, the song is still king for me. I mean, I still fall in love with the process of songwriting, over and over again.
Charlie, what do you it's funny. Ryan I have two lives, musician and also was kind of a business guy. And one thing I've noted about people that ultimately become successful, whatever that means, just accept a broad definition of success, just for the purposes of this question, I guess. What amongst the artists that you helped, worked with, saw, witnessed, that became successful, what were the common denominators? For me in business, it was perseverance and following through on what you had, knowing what you had was good, and that people would ultimately come around to see it. And I think of my favorite band, Steely Dan, which of course you love, without a doubt, as a musician. I always try, Ryan always makes fun of me for being dating myself and saying Steely Dan is my favorite band, but
all right. I was just with Michael Mardian the other day,
okay.
and
right. So
We actually have a chart here at our podcast that has like number of days since Gideon King makes a Steely Dan reference, and now we have to put it back at 0 again.
I love it. I love it.
So they're my favorite band of all time. Guilty as charged. What can I tell you? And I've played with some of those their people, and some of those people have been in my band. So listen. So what is it in your mind that is the common denominator amongst people who ultimately become successful artists? Like, what are the few traits that they have, psychological or whatever?
Yeah. I think the first one for me is that they're a good hang. They are people that you want to spend time with. And they don't wear that out. It doesn't mean that there isn't tension, that you don't have, the normal things that broken human beings have amongst each other, but that overall you always come back to, like, I really like that person. I love hanging with them. And then secondly, for me, what I've always seen is there has to be an element of their artistry that, in a sense, sort of raises its hand and says, "Come get me," or it signals to you that I'm creating something that is familiar but slightly different.
Totally.
Now, in the case of someone like Steely Dan, I would say the innovation is quite strong. So, of course, I'm always looking for that. But what I definitely will gravitate towards something like Switchfoot was a great example, because at the time when I wanted to sign them, I was listening to Oasis. I was listening to all the, what was essentially this sort of rock radio boom of the 90s, right? And I was like, man, I got to sign a band like that. I just signed this female singer-songwriter, named Sarah Mason from Detroit. And we knew we were going to go to, AAA with her, but we were just like, man, there's this whole wide, lane open for rock bands right now. And so what I heard initially was, I heard teenagers playing, their influences, whether it was, who knows, could have been Space Hog, it could have been Foo Fighters or whatever, but some elements of that, but then something very, very unique. Like every once in a while, they would do something that would tell me that if I came around them, if I brought my resources to bear upon their life, then those unique things would be allowed to come forward even more, because I would encourage them.
Sure.
right? And so that's a big important thing for me. I don't invest in people or work with people that don't have that element.
It's funny too, Ryan, what Charlie's saying, because think of it this way. When Charlie talks about the hang, think of it this way. Sound checks at, load ins at 1, sound checks at 4:30. Okay. Then you strike the stage, then you come back on stage, and then there's a quick sound check, and then you play for an hour and a half or 45 minutes or 2 hours. But you're actually hanging out with these people more than you are playing with them. And rehearsal, putting things together, scheduling. And I've gotten to the point where there's so many unbelievable musicians in New York City that all I want to do is find a nice person who's funny and who's fun to hang out with in my band. So like when I have to replace a band member or someone goes on tour, of course I'm going to try and get an incredible musical athlete and someone who's amazing. But like
Yeah.
if they're not a fun, nice person with a sense of humor, it's like
Yeah.
it absolutely poisons the experience, and those people tend to be less successful. They sabotage themselves. So like
Yes, they
that's
do.
just giving maybe you a little color on the fact that you hang almost more than you play.
Yeah. Yeah, most definitely. And when I became very active as a producer, it became obvious to me that that was part of my gig, was to cast the people in the room, and that I was the overseer of the room, like the director of a film. And so I had to cast the right characters. If I knew that I had an introverted, insecure artist, then the last thing I was going to do was hire this amazing drummer X, because he had a tendency to sort of take over the room. And so I would go for the more tender, sort of listening kind of person who was an equally great drummer, maybe different, slightly different, but equally good, but someone who would be more inclined to talk to the artist and say, "What is there anything I can do better to make it more like you're hearing in your head?" You know? And whereas there might be
love
another
that.
artist that they don't want to have that conversation with the
Totally.
musicians, you know?
Wow.
And so I could hire this other drummer X that I was talking about, and they would just come in and, literally first take, and we'd cut it a few more times, but I knew they were that kind of drummer, but I also knew they were that kind of person that might not be right for everyone.
Wow. Our guest has been Charlie Peacock. His new album, Every Kind of Uh-Oh, dropped on August 30th. You can check that out. And his memoir, Roots in Rhythm and Life in Music, is going to be coming out early next year. Find out more by visiting charliepeacock.com. Charlie, you have been a good hang. Let's just make that
Well,
perfectly
thank you.
clear right
Thank
now.
you. Well,
And just I've really enjoyed this conversation. Really have appreciated your perspective. Got one last question for you before we let you go this week. And given your experience in the industry and all the things you've accomplished, I think you're going to have a pretty great answer for us. Do you have any last tips for the indie creators out there to help them move their careers forward?
yes, most definitely. Like, for example, I live in Nashville, and Nashville is the, hot music city. We have hundreds of people moving here every day to get a day job so that they can go out and do songwriter nights and write, take one day a week, whether it's a Monday or a Friday or whatever, and take that day off and do nothing but take writing sessions that day. People with big dreams, And so we talked about the hang, and we talked about the uniqueness component. And I would probably stress that. I would stress that, and just general competency of being prepared. And not only that, I think I would say you don't need, if you're 20 years old or 25 years old even, and you're coming to Nashville or New York City or Los Angeles, where there are extraordinary musicians, you don't even know what you don't know yet. So don't be like so many people in this age group that feel like we're all peers. You're not a peer with me. That's just a fact. You're not my peer. You're a peer with other people that are in your general age group, right? Or your general experience. So I think that's a huge mistake that people are making now when they come to town, because that's a part of their culture and it's a part of their generation. But no, we are not peers. And if you really want to succeed and you really want to listen, then spend time around people who can give you the secrets to the universe. And because you don't have them yet. And there are some really simple shortcuts that you can take that will help you jump way above the competition. And so be listening for those. So if it's me or someone else who says, look, there's got to be something significantly interesting about what you do. If you're the person, maybe you're the person in a writing room that all you do is you just stay quiet for most of the time. And then right at the right moment, you say, I've been thinking about the bridge and, or that second verse. And here are 3 options that I've come up with. Do you guys want to take a look at those? All right. So I think I got some ideas. No, I have concrete ideas. In fact, I have 3 of them. And and the thing is that here's the key. All 3 have to be amazing. And when you lob those out there after being quiet for this amount of time, right, while everybody else is fighting for attention, oh man, you are going to win so many points, because you're going to show yourself as somebody who can be a good listener, who can give people space to collaborate, and then bam, you come in with the craft, right? So think about how you can do that in every aspect of your music career, and you'll have a chance of succeeding.
Thank you so much, Charlie. Our thanks to Charlie Peacock, co-host Gideon King. Thanks to producer Lauren, and to all of you viewers and listeners, thank you for checking out Break the Business. We'll see you next week.
Break the business, play is work and work is play. Power into creators, have fun along the way. Break the business, doing what it takes. Celebrate success and learn from the mistakes.